How to Speak Investor, prepared for and presented at the 2018 Square One Entrepreneurship Training Program. Square One is a program of the Center for Emerging Technologies. CET is an affiliate of the Cortex Innovation Community. Square One is funded in part by the Missouri Technology Corporation.
So this is a presentation I've given a number of times. I kind of look at it as kind of like Angel 101. It's kind of the crash course and everything you need to understand about raising capital from angels. And the goal of this presentation and why this fits very well with the panel and afterwards is raising capital from angels isn't for everybody, and it's probably not right for you. So the goal of my presentation is for you to be able to sit back and go, oh crap, I don't want to do that. I'm going to listen to people about bootstrapping that come in. So, just real quickly about me, I always believe that you should understand what the speaker is speaking about so you can, pretty much tell whether they're bullshit or not. So I spent 4 years with a large angel organization called Techos Angels. They're one of the largest angel organizations in the US. They have about 300 to 350 members at any point in time. In the 4 years that I was with them, I reviewed over 1,400 applications. That included funding applications and applications to participate in some of our other activities. I attended over 600 investor pitches. At my peak, I was watching 30 to 40 pitches a month. So that gets kind of intense. And the San Diego network, which is Techos Angels, is composed of 5 different networks, led investments of over $23 million into 37 deals just in the 4 years that I was with them. So, personally, I've also raised a little over $3 million for 4 early stage ventures, and the early stage ventures cover the gambit from an online dating app, an app that allows moms to meet, an accelerator fund, and a celebrities consumer product company. So, real quick, I am an EIR for ITEN, so when I've been giving this, I've been giving it as an ITEN EIR. So high level, wanted to kind of talk about the organization. ITEN has programs for scalable tech product startups that includes a mentor match database. So if you belong to ITEN, you can go in and you can get access to all 60 of their mentors, and we're adding mentors daily. Entrepreneurs in Residence, which Quentin is and I am myself. There's also the Eureka validation modules, which allow you to start working through operations, product development, marketing, sales, a number of things. Might be a little bit of a deeper dive of what you guys are getting out of this program. This is probably a bit more of a crash course. But the beauty is you can then take the Eureka validation modules and you can go sit down with a mentor and you can start diving specifically into some of those modules with the mentors that are really good at that aspect. And then they have an investor readiness program, which involves a mock angels investor pitch, some due diligence preparedness, and can potentially lead to introductions to some investors as well. So that's the little paid for buy spiel. So a lot of startups come to me and say, hey Jack, I want to raise capital, what do I need to do? And that's a very long conversation. So I try to break it into about 3 steps. Tonight we're going to really focus on the first one. And I do put a large emphasis on educating yourself on raising capital. If you're not knowledgeable about the process and what's going on, you're never going to be able to raise capital. Step 2 is then meet with your corporate attorney and prepare the investor documents. And then step 3 is build an investor funnel and initiate the sales process. So if you go to the ITEN blog, there's a number of blog posts I've been writing. These are probably the 4 that are the most relevant to this process. But again, tonight we're just going to kind of focus on step 1, educating yourself on raising capital. I usually suggest meet with angel investors, read books about angel investing, and meet with other founders. Those are usually your 3 sources of the best way to get the real information and kind of start wrapping your head around whether raising capital is right for you and how to start going about executing. So, what we're going to start with for the first half of this presentation is what I call commonly misunderstood terms. These are the things that when I was sitting in investor meetings with entrepreneurs, an investor asked a question, an entrepreneur answered, and it was very obvious that the entrepreneur had no idea what the investor was asking about, and they were on 2 completely different pages. Now, the problem with that is, one, as I said, that's a basic education issue. If you're going to raise capital, you should understand what you're doing. You should understand the terms that the investors are using. Because showed to the investors was that this entrepreneur was unprepared, and it usually led to a very quick no thanks for passing. So it's kind of silly that simply not understanding the language or not understanding what the investors were asking would lead to an opportunity failing as quickly as it did. So for these next probably 10 slides or so, we're just going to high level go through some concepts, and just so you guys can start wrapping your head around what investors are actually talking about when they ask you these types of questions. So the first is accredited investors. And yes, there is a definition of what an accredited investor is. It is put out by the SEC, and so when an investor says, oh, is your cap table only accredited investors? And you say, yes, it's all accredited investors, that means your grandma can't be on it unless your grandma has $1 million worth of assets. So again, make sure you know these definitions. It's not a bad thing that your grandma's on your cap table, but don't tell an investor your cap table is only accredited investors when it's your mom and your grandma and your uncle. So next is valuation. This is everyone's favorite. So entrepreneurs, when you ask them what the value of their company is, they always look at the future value of the company, and they base that off of the market potential. And usually it's followed something like, my company's worth $10 million because it's $1 billion market, and I know I'm going to get 10% of it. The problem is, when an investor asks you about your valuation, he's asking what the current valuation of your company is. And that's based upon the milestones you've achieved, the tech you've built, revenue you have, etc. Where this becomes a problem is that the investor's returns are generated off the difference between the current value and the future value. So yes, they may agree with you that there is a huge future value of your company, but that doesn't mean that your company is worth that today. So again, this is probably one of the main areas of kind of difference that I used to see when entrepreneurs and investors were talking. So again, valuation refers to your current valuation based off of the milestones that you have achieved, not necessarily based off of the milestones that you can achieve or the market potential. Another one is cash flow positive and break-even point. Entrepreneurs tend to mix these up or think they are the same thing. And I'm not a true finance guy, so I don't fully understand this myself, but I do know that they're different. Cash flow positive is generally the point when income exceeds expenses without the help of investor capital, which means your revenues that you're bringing in each month or each quarter covers your expenses and you don't have to go out and raise outside capital. That's when you're cash flow positive. Again, this can be tricky to determine because you can be cash flow positive, but you may want to bring in investor capital to do things like blow out your marketing. You're technically cash flow positive because you don't need marketing, but in order to grow your business, you do. And break-even point is when you've achieved cash flow positive and have also generated enough capital to pay back your investors. So again, there are differences between the two. They can get a little gray at times, especially when you're talking about growing a business or expediting a business, but these do actually mean things when you're talking to, especially when you're talking to financial-based investors. In revenue and profitable business. Again, entrepreneurs love to mix these up and or think they're the same thing. In revenue is when a company has identified a sustainable revenue model. Not just a single revenue event. I love when entrepreneurs say, well, I have one customer and they paid me $1, so I'm in revenue. It's like, no. Again, it's when you've identified a sustainable revenue model, that's when you're in revenue. And a profitable business is when the income and revenue can cover all operational expenses and a little more without requiring outside capital for a sustainable amount of time. So again, just because you are profitable this month doesn't mean you're a profitable business. When you've been profitable for 9 months in a row and you project to be profitable for the next 3 months, then you're a profitable business. Lead investor. So entrepreneurs tend to think the lead investor is the first check-in, which may or may not be true. But the reality is when investors ask if there's a lead investor, there's a set, almost rule or things that the lead investor is supposed to do. And generally the lead investor needs to satisfy these criteria. That they've conducted an independent due diligence, that they represent a significant portion of the round, and that they're assuming a leadership role in the company, which is generally a board seat. So again, your first check-in may represent a significant portion of the round and may be taking a leadership role in the company, or it just may be someone who gave you $10,000 in a $250,000 round and wants you to just make them a bunch of money without having any role in your company. So they wouldn't be considered a lead investor. You know, also when you're talking about lead investors, that can be a group of investors. So like Archangels or Techos Angels can be your lead investor. It doesn't necessarily need to be a person, or there can be a group of 3 or 4 people that invest together that can, again, be your lead investors. And the reason you generally look for a group of people is there's, you know, satisfying these criteria takes a lot of work. And it's usually a lot to ask from one single investor. But the thing to keep in mind, and this is really why it's important for the entrepreneur to have a lead investor, is that the role of lead investor is to coordinate the closing of the entire round. You know, they're your cheerleader. They're the person that is going to help you go out. Let's say you're raising $250,000 and they put the first $50,000 in. You're still $200,000 short. By them accepting the lead investor role, it's their job to help you go out and find that other $200,000, because they know if you don't get that other $200,000, the company is going to be undercapitalized. So again, there's value from the entrepreneur's perspective to going out and finding the lead investor, because this is the person that's going to go out and help you fundraise as well. Due diligence, we mentioned this on the previous slide. So entrepreneurs usually think this is simply providing investors with company-generated documents. And that's the first step of due diligence. But when an investor says, hey, has someone completed due diligence on you, what they're actually looking for is, has there been a third party or independent review of the company and the materials that you provided? And ideally, they're looking for the lead investor to have created some type of due diligence summary or report, something that they can then read. Yes?
What type of organization does a third party review? Is that necessarily a legal organization, or is it?
No, it just means not associated with your company. Or usually it's your lead investor. So if another angel group is asking for the due diligence, that could come from the lead investor, which would then be third party independent. Alternatively, some investors will do their own due diligence, but they'll want to see the report first, because by seeing the report first, it cuts down the amount of time that they need to do on their own due diligence. So again, you know, the purpose of the due diligence summary / report is to essentially highlight the risks associated with the investment opportunity and what is being done to mitigate the risk on both by the company and the investors of the board of directors. Keep in mind that not all investor groups will create a due diligence summary or report or share their summary. So when you're looking for a lead investor, that's a question asked. You know, are you going to actually do due diligence, and are you going to put it in a shareable report? If they say no, maybe they're not the best lead investor for you. Doesn't mean they shouldn't invest in your company, but maybe you shouldn't have them leading the round. The other thing I will mention, there are groups out there that will do reviews of due diligence for you, but it's a little awkward because they're not actually putting their own money in it. So it's a little weird for someone to say, oh, well, this group that isn't willing to invest in this company told me it's a good investment opportunity. Or this group that was actually paid for by the company is telling me that this is a great investment opportunity. So that's why, well, yes, it's third party independent. It's not necessarily third party like you went out and paid someone to do it. Does that make sense? So here's the big question. Why is due diligence important? From the entrepreneur perspective, having a solid due diligence summary and report will lower the amount of time additional investors will need to spend doing due diligence on your investment opportunities, which then lowers the amount of time and energy it will take for you to close your round. So while going through due diligence with your lead investor is a pain in the ass, if you do it properly and if it's documented well, it will make getting the other 70% of your round much easier. And from the investors, you know, median due diligence completed by an investor in a company is about 20 hours with a mean of 60 hours. And studies have shown that when investors spend less than 20 hours doing due diligence, it leads to almost breaking even. But when they spend over 40 hours on due diligence, it leads to a 7x return. So from the investor perspective, doing due diligence is going to be the difference between breaking even / losing money or making money. But again, most entrepreneurs don't like due diligence because, to be honest, it's a pain in the ass. But the reality is, it makes you a stronger company because you've gone through it and you can start to shore up some of the risks that were identified. And it's also going to make all future fundraising efforts a lot easier. Yes?
We learned about audits a couple of weeks ago, so similar to going out and getting an independent audit of your company, can you be proactive and go identify companies to do due diligence for you, which you didn't take to a lead investor to say, we got this?
No.
Or it
I mean,
absolutely has to be the lead investor?
The lead investor is going to want to do it because, again, they're putting their money behind it. So this isn't like investing in public stocks where you're like, oh, this analyst told me this was a really good stock to buy, so I'm going to invest in it. These things tend to be very personalized, and so it's not quite to the level of financial audit because financial audits are numbers. Numbers either make sense or they don't. This is looking at risk associated with an investment, and risk appetite is different across investors. Risk appetite is even different across investors in angel groups. So again, this tends to be very personalized. Yeah.
Hi. You may come to this later, I'm sorry if I'm
Oh, no worries.
doing that, but what role does ITEN play in, I know they collect due diligence
Yes.
documents.
Yes.
What does it require, how far down the road is that? What else has to happen for due diligence once somebody's collected all these documents?
For ITEN or for an investor?
What does an investor have to do once ITEN has done all this? What's the next step?
So what ITEN is doing is essentially a mock due diligence, and by ITEN, I do it. So essentially, we've created a list of due diligence items that any company going through Mock Angels we send, and we do a formal request as though we are an investor. And that list has been curated from the list I had from Techos Angels and the list I had from a number of other places. And then the companies upload those documents to a data room, and then I go through them and I essentially critique them. And I'll say things like, look, you're really missing these documents, or this document wasn't in the right format, or you're looking at this wrong. It's really just a suggestion in helping them ensure that they have a deal room ready for when they go out and raise capital. So it's the natural progression to, we bring you into the Mock Angels panel and you pitch in front of our Mock Angels, and they give you feedback on your pitch. Then you go away, you address the feedback, we bring you back in, you pitch again, you graduate. Well, then the next step is you work with Jack, and Jack kind of takes you through due diligence 101 type of thing. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So I'm going to kind of transition to the realities of raising capital. So very quickly, you guys may have kind of covered some of this a little earlier, but Steve Blank has an article out there where he says there's 6 different types of startups. There's lifestyle startups and there's small business startups. And these are kind of the smaller opportunities. Doesn't mean they're not good businesses in any way, shape, or form, but these types of businesses just tend not to be attractive to investors because they don't offer a large opportunity for liquidity or return. Then you have what he calls a social startup and a large company startup. Again, these usually don't align with what investors are looking for because there's not easy access to an IPO or merger acquisition or anything like that. So, the types of startups that most investors are interested in are the scalable startups. These are ones that are born to be big. So, think Facebook, think Google, or viable startups, which are, companies that were started for the sole purpose of being acquired by a Facebook or a Google. So the one thing to keep in mind out of this is, not every successful company is actually a good fit for the typical angel investor. And again, if you're doing a lifestyle startup or if you have a small business startup, you can be extremely successful, but you're probably going to be unsuccessful raising capital simply because the way that your business is structured doesn't lead to an easy opportunity for them to get their money back. And so one of the first things when you go out to raise capital is make sure you know which one of these 6 you are, and then make sure you're aligning yourself and targeting investors that are interested in investing in the type of company that you are. On top of that, not all investors are created equal. So when you look at like your friends and family, the interesting thing about them is they're investing in you. In fact, most of the time they don't even care about the business model or the product or anything like that. They believe in you and they're investing their capital in you. When you then move on to kind of what I'm going to call unsophisticated investors, these are generally new to angel investing, so less than 2 to 3 years of experience. And probably invest in less than 5 companies. Again, what it takes to convince an unsophisticated investor to write a check compared to what it takes, you know, for a more sophisticated investor to write a check are 2 different things. You know, the pros of targeting these guys or these 2 groups is it's fairly easy to convince them to write a check. Your friends and family either know you and trust you, or the unsophisticated investors haven't been burned enough and just love investing in great ideas. The cons is they can offer limited support or value behind capital. Very rarely are you going to go to your grandma and be like, "Hey, grandma, I'm having problems with my P&L. You know, do you think you can help me out over Thanksgiving dinner?" They may not be able to write multiple checks, and they can sometimes be more trouble than the value of their capital. Speaking of, when you take money from friends and family, it does make Thanksgiving dinner awkward. Very, very awkward. You know, the next group I like to talk about, I call them domain experts. These are investors that have an extremely heavy expertise in the market that you're in. Thus, they understand the problem you're trying to address and really understand, you know, whether the solution you have or not is the holy grail for this problem and the potential to disrupt the industry. The pros is that these guys understand the problem and understand the solution, so you don't have to spend a lot of time convincing them on that. They can also add tremendous value to the company beyond capital, specifically market specific. You know, they can generally help you out with introductions to customers and things like that. The problem is they can be extremely difficult to identify. There isn't like an angel list out there for, you know, who's the domain expert in, let's say, real estate tech. On top of that, they have a very narrow investment thesis, which means when you're pitching them, you know, there's a better chance than not that they're not actually interested in what you're doing. So again, when you seek these people out, you know, it's difficult to find them. They can have a narrow investment thesis, so just, you know that going in. However, you know, they can add tremendous value if you happen to find them. General investors. So these are people that are looking for the best investment opportunities regardless of the market or industry. These are your typical angel investors. These are the ones that you'll find at Archangels, or Techos Angels, or Centennial investors in Colombia. The pros is they're super easy to find. They usually have websites. They usually take online applications. They can add value beyond capital market expertise because they're generally successful business people. Now, they may not have value or expertise in your specific area, but you can ask them to help with a P&L. You can ask them to help with sales calls. You know, the general business stuff they understand. The cons is that you're then competing with a number of other investment opportunities across a variety of industries. And things you keep in mind, sometimes you're dealing with individuals, sometimes you're dealing with groups. Individuals are extremely easy to schedule meetings with and get quick investment decisions, but you generally have to cobble together a lot of individuals in order to close, say, a $250,000 round. Groups, however, offer way more access to investors, but they usually have scheduling limitations and rigid workflows. When I was with Techos Angels, our committee meetings were the 3rd Thursday of every month. Didn't matter whether you had a big sales call or you had a family emergency that day. If you weren't able to make that meeting, you were bumped to the next month or maybe even the month after that. So just, you know, high level, looking at individual investors versus institutional capital. The pros is that individual investors are investing their own capital. In fact, they're generally writing you a check out of a checkbook. It's kind of crazy to see someone write a $25,000 check, but I've seen it. And they're generally going to put less pressure on you to become a unicorn or achieve outsized returns. They generally want you to develop a strong business, and they realize that if you develop a strong business, that they will see a return. The cons are that you can be at the risk of, you know, economic events that are outside of your control. You know, I worked with angel groups when there was a market downturn and everyone lost 20% of their portfolio, and let's just say that quarter no checks were written. Had absolutely nothing to do with the entrepreneurs that were pitching that month, but our members just lost 20% of their net worth. Politics and election cycles can have issues. Timing and holidays, I'll tell you right now, Q4 is the worst time to raise capital from angel investors. From Thanksgiving to about January 15th, they don't take new meetings. They're usually spending time with family, or they're wrapping up the fourth quarter themselves. And you can have large and unforeseen personal expenses. I had an investor one time that I was about ready to write a large check, and then he called me up and said, Jack, I've got great news. My daughter's getting married. I'm like, awesome. He's like, and I've got bad news. That check I was going to write you is now going to pay for wedding. So again, there's pros, but there's also cons. You know, when you're dealing with someone's personal capital, it's very different than when you're dealing with an institutional capital where they have to invest in X number of companies a year. Real quickly, I want to kind of go through some angel investing statistics. Most people don't know these. These stats are a little out of date, but I think the general trends still hold true. There's over 300,000 active angel investors in the U.S. And in 2014, they funded over 70,000 companies and invested almost $25 billion. In contrast, if you look at venture capital in that same time period, they invested just under $50 billion. So they invested twice as much money, but they invested in less than 5,000 companies. So there's 18 times as many companies that are getting funded by angels at any point in time than venture capitalists. So one of the things I see when I run into entrepreneurs all the time is they all want to go raise institutional capital. They all want to go raise a $10 million round. And reality is, you know, there's less than 5,000 companies a year that are getting institutional money. You know, if you're going to raise capital, this is a larger pool for you to actually be playing in. A couple other things to keep in mind. The average angel deal size, $350,000. So that's the entire round, $350,000, with a pre-money valuation of just over $2 million. The number of checks an angel investor wrote in the last year, median of 2, median of 4. So again, when you meet with an individual angel investor, the question becomes, are you one of the top 2 to 4 companies they're going to see that year?
What is the term pre-money mean?
That is the value of the company before the investment is made. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then post-money would be, you add the pre-money plus the amount invested, and that gives you your post-money. And then here's the even more surprising one. The total number of checks an angel writes in their career, again, median of 10, median of 20. So any angel investor that you meet, you need to be in the top 20 of the companies that they'll see in their lifetime. Another trick is to ask an angel investor how many checks they've written. If they're telling you it's in the 18, 19, 20 range, they may not be able to write any more checks. If they tell you it's in the 5, 6, 7 range, then they probably have a couple more checks in them. And the average size of an angel check, $25,000 with a mean of $35,000. So again, the thing I tell people, if you're raising a $250,000 seed round, that's 10 investors. If you're raising a $1 million round, that's 40 investors. If we start talking about, you know, drop off, you know, if we assume you're going to have a 10% close rate, if you want to raise $1 million from angels and you've got a 10% close rate, you need to get in front of 400 investors. Yes?
What about lead investors, or what's the median for those?
These statistics are just on individual angels.
Okay.
Now again, these angels were in an angel organization, so that organization may be the lead. So that's where I would maybe look at that. And women comprise approximately 25% of all angel investors. So these are numbers I pulled from when I was active with Techos Angels, but I think these are some realities that most entrepreneurs don't get. When I was with Techos Angels, just in San Diego alone, we got 20 applications a month, approximately 250 applications a year. We had a multiple stage screening process. We had a committee meeting, we had a life science and a high tech committee meeting that met once a month. And essentially, we only took about 10 applications a month got into our committee meeting. That means 50% of the applications that were submitted to Techos Angels were only seen by me and the committee chair. So didn't even get seen by any of the investors. Once a month we had a general membership meeting. This was where all of the membership came. Again, we were only taking about 5 companies a month. So again, only a quarter of the applications that came in even made it to get in front of all of our members. From the general membership meeting, if there was enough interest, we would schedule deep dive due diligence meetings with companies. But again, we were doing about 2 a month, maybe 25 a year. So again, only 10% of the companies even got to the point where they were sitting down and having a 2 to 3 hour meeting with the angel investors. From that, we had about another 50% drop off from when we would actually initiate due diligence. That would be where we request the due diligence documents, we would form a due diligence team, and we would spend probably 6 to 8 weeks going through the company's records and interviewing them extensively. And we were funding less than 10 new deals a year. So our funding rate was at about below 4%. Now, compared to venture capital, which has about a 1%, maybe even less than a 1% rate, I mean, we were much higher. But again, you need to think about this. If you're applying to a Techos Angels or an Arch Angels or a Centennial Angels, they're funding less than 5%. Yes?
Do you have any feel for what percentage, I mean, you guys funded 4%, but of the people that applied to you, do you have any feel for how many of them got funded by other people?
That's difficult because if they got funding a year later and hit more developmental milestones, they probably could have come back and got funded by us. But I would say slim amount. Yes?
On your last slide, can you explain that 25% statistic? Is that based on the women an angel's portfolio, only a quarter, or?
No, literally a quarter of all the angel investors. So if you go up here and there's 300,000 active angel investors, a quarter of them are women.
Gotcha.
Any other questions? Yes?
Could you give an example, very vague of course, of a company that actually landed in that 4%? Like what would the characteristics be that got them all the way there?
So with Techos Angels, that's very difficult to do because we were doing everything from drug discovery to consumer apps to consumer products.
Something like established in the market, has products out there.
So if we look at investment life cycles, what you'll see, the yellow line is, I think this is investment interest. The blue is risk. So if you're looking at, idea stage, prototype, first customers, growth, expansion, here's where revenue comes in. Venture capitalists are playing in this area right here in between first company or first customers and growth, kind of where the lines between risk and investment interest are intersecting. So, your idea stages, friends, families, accelerators. Angels will come in at, the product and prototype stage, but they're really looking to kind of move their way up here into the first customer. So, reality is right now there's an imbalance of deals. There's more deals than there are investors, so that allows investors to move farther and farther up the cycle. And then sometimes that allows venture capital to move farther and farther up the cycle as well. So, it's really all about traction. And just kind of one other way of looking at this, previously, I'm sure everyone heard 5-10 years ago, angels would invest in a prototype or very early stage, MVP, but now they're able to wait until you actually have customer traction. They're able to see what the traction in the marketplace is and gauge and pick the companies that have the best product market fit. So again, at the concept, MVP level, down here, while you're starting to get product market fit, that's when investors are starting to get interested in and showing more interest in you. But again, this quote unquote valley of death from kind of concept of product market fit is getting longer because investors are able to cherry pick the best deals, and the best deals have the most traction. One concept I've been seeing that I kind of want to go over that I actually really like is that seed is now a phase that's no longer round. Everyone used to talk about, oh, I do my seed round, and I'll do my A and my B, and reality is round names are just marketing terms. They don't mean anything. And there's a couple of people, and these are actually hyperlinked to some blog posts that if you're going to raise capital are really are worth reading. But there's these concepts that there's really only probably 3 different phases to, you know, a high growth startup's life cycle. And, you know, one is, you know, when you're an early venture, and this is you're still kind of lining up the evidence and traction and proving things out and showing product market fit and things like that. And it's, you know, but the inflection point is your Series A. And so, you know, and then your Series A is all about, you know, how do we take everything that we prove and try to transition from a company with a great offering that could scale to a company with a great offering that is scaling and is scaling in a predictable manner. And once you're scaling in a predictable manner, well, then you can come in for growth stage funding. But the thing I want to point out is this early venture, that this can last 6 months or it can last 3 years, and it's okay for you to raise multiple rounds while you're in here. Again, seed is no longer a single round, it's a phase. And so if you have to raise $250,000 3 times, like, that's okay, that's not a failure. You know, this concept of you raise your $250,000 and then you raise $1 million and then you raise $10 million, it's kind of an old dogma. And you need to raise as much money as possible in order to prove that you're ready for a Series A. So unfortunately, just because you raised your seed round, it's kind of just the beginning, it doesn't get any easier. So what we're looking at here is in 2010, and through 2010, 2011, 60% of companies that raised their seed round went on to raise additional funding. But as you're looking at 2014, 2015, and 2016, it's getting harder and harder for companies that successfully raised the seed round to go on and raise additional capital.
Is the reason being that there's just way more people with access to businesses?
I think there's a lot of things. I mean, I think this is artificially deflated because when this number came out, there may have been some companies that raised after the study was done that would have inflated this. I think this is because there were just fewer companies. It was easier to get traction. There wasn't as much noise in the market, and investors hadn't moved farther upstage. But I do think in here, it's just because you raise, a seed round doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the product market fit and everything that you're going to need in order to go out and get a Series A round. And then again, the Series A guys are getting way more selective. Yes?
I'm sorry. I'm not exactly clear on what you mean by product market fit.
So product market fit is essentially that the market loves your product. It's that when you put your product out there, it's being used in the way that you said it was being used, and it's being used in a way that you can commercialize. And in that, you can essentially say, look, we put this product out to solve X, and our customers are solving X, and they love it. Yeah.
Does that mean that 1 year track record, or like how is the proof of?
There's no direct answer to that, and it's probably industry specific. But gone are the days of just, hey, I've got an app and there's a whole bunch of downloads. Great, you got a whole bunch of downloads. Tell me exactly how people are using it. Are they on for 30 seconds? Are they on every day? That's now what they're looking at. Those metrics have moved beyond just downloads and into how people are actually using it. And when you look at how people are using it and how often they're using it, it correlates to how strong of a fit it is for their need. Theory being the stronger fit, the easier it's going to be for you to commercialize it. Any other questions? Yeah.
I was curious if you could say anything more. He's talking about investors have moved up your curve a little bit. It seems obviously desirable to them for them to do that. Why were they able to do that later and not earlier? What changed?
By moving up the curve, they're able to invest in less risky investments, which means less of them are failing.
Right, but so it seems like they would have always wanted to do that if they had the option.
So if we go back to one of these things, so when venture capitalists were stealing all of these deals, there wasn't any deals for angels to move up. But when venture capitalists start moving into here, it opens up And so then angels can move up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So essentially, the more mega funds that are opening and only making $100 million investments, that opens up a hole for $25 million investments, and someone moves from $10 million investments to $25 million investments. Well, someone that was making $1 million investments now raises a larger fund and fills in the hole of a $10 million investment, and then angels fill in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so to summarize, it's kind of a ripple effect of the appearance of very large funds. Is that
Yeah, and it certainly doesn't help that now you're starting to get hedge funds and other guys that are coming into Ubers and things like that. So, you're getting, more playing at this stage, which is kind of leaving a hole in here, which then allows people who are back here to shift up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, is there a change, or what happens to like the original investors or the original founders of the company? As an organization, this is much bigger. Do the investors, especially the venture capitalists, kind of ask for the founders and stuff to kind of set out the way?
I mean, that depends. The two comments I'll make on that are the Steve Jobs and the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world are very, very, very rare. And that if you look at what a business needs are at different points in time, it's very rare to find someone that can be the founder, that can actually, handle this. One, because the things that make you amazing and passionate about it down here, you will hate when you get up here. SEC regulation, dealing with, lawyer. I mean, suddenly you're no longer solving your problem and doing things you're passionate about. You're running a company of 100 people. And so there is what I would call a natural selection. I mean, I think a number of founders just reach a point where they're like, this is no longer any fun. I will gladly turn this over to someone that is way better at this than I am. But there is also certainly people being kicked out, either nicely or forcefully. But again, when you look at, as a company grows, what it needs, again, the very passionate, ultra creative founder that came up with the concept probably isn't the most organized person to be able to run a 100-person company without running afoul of, HR regulations and things like that. Again, it's not a knock on them. It's just the way their brain works and what they're really good at doing is polar opposite to what you need when you get to that point. Did that answer that question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, if I could just build on that point for
Yeah.
a second. I think it's a really profound question, and it was a great answer. And I think everybody in the room should think about whether they want to start an entrepreneurial company and be an entrepreneur on one gig, or if they like entrepreneurship enough to have a career in entrepreneurship. There's actually a difference, because just as Jack was pointing out, it's extremely rare for somebody to stay as the leader, founder, and then CEO, and then head of a great big enterprise. It does happen, but it's exceedingly rare. And generally speaking, what people do, and I'll just be honest, I built a career of it personally. I decided that, in my business, life sciences, the chances of a company making it all the way through to have a great big exit is low. So instead of being an entrepreneur on one company, as I think I explained early out, I've done 10. And why is that? Because I wanted my career to be all about having multiple shots on goal. So the fact that you might get diluted out of your company or asked by your board, hey, it's been great, but we really need to bring in professional large company management now, you need to maybe think about that might be a good thing for you ultimately. And because it increases the chance of your company having a great exit at some point and paying your investors back, and by the way, your own shares get valued at that point. And it frees you to cycle another time to do this again. So I know this is a daunting thought when you're in a starting class and you're just thinking about your first entrepreneurial gig. But we're trying to teach skills that apply across many opportunities, not just the one you're working on right now. And so you might be thinking about in this class and as you go forward. Do I want to just work on this one thing and take the huge risk that it might be the one out of hundreds that becomes super successful? Or do I want to get good at starting things and have a chance to have multiple shots on goal and do what I love to do because I'm that creative kind of person? Obviously, this is a question everybody has to answer for themselves, and there's a lot of differences. There's a huge continuum between those two extremes I just described. So anyway, so it's not necessarily a bad thing that you're going to be cycled off. If your company, in fact, turns out to be successful, you may not end up leading it all the way. And that's something you should all think about. Because if you resist that idea and your investors want to take it in that direction, I guarantee it's not going to be pretty. So, Jack, I hope you don't mind the interjection.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Just as a build on that, I would also add, you're doing yourself a really big favor if you know yourself well enough to know what your true psychological motivations are. I started a company and I thought initially it sounded great leading it, and by the end of the first year, my co-founder and I realized that, as we jokingly called it, we needed adult supervision, because there were things that we liked to do, but they weren't the umbrella task of pulling both of the things we like to do together under a common platform. So it takes a lot of stepping back from who you thought you were when you started the company to who you really are as a person. And at the end of the day, if you're in it for the value creation, it doesn't really matter. You don't even need a title on your business card. You just need to get the tasks done. So being able to step away and hand somebody else the baton, a lot of times, even in the absence of going down very far down this path at all, it can be one of the better things for you as well.
Yeah, good point.
All right, just a couple of final thoughts. Keep in mind that your main competition for capital is not actually from your direct competitors, but it's actually from the deal the investor saw right before you or right after you. And that raising capital from outside investors is extremely difficult, requires alignment between the investors and entrepreneurs. It's even more challenging if you give an investor a reason to say no, simply because you can't understand each other or your expectations are not aligned. And that a successful fundraising effort requires entrepreneurs to spend time learning investors, their motives, and their expectations. Yeah?
So could you spend a few minutes talking about how much time it takes to do this for the investors? You kind of mentioned it, touched on a few points, and I think that oftentimes when I'm talking to people about fundraising, they don't realize the commitment to doing this, even though you said how many people for the sales cycle.
Yeah. So I'll work backwards to get to that. So when I was at Techos Angels, I was in charge of overseeing due diligence, and we had a company, Pediatric Bioscience. We ended up raising, I think in their first round, about $600,000, and then they came back and we raised about another $500,000 for them. They were a assay company. We ended up compiling on their first round a 250-page due diligence report. I worked on that company for 8 straight weeks, and that was 8 straight weeks of me meeting with the founders and the founders team and reviewing the scientific literature and going back to them. The reason it took so long was every time we turned over a rock, 4 more questions popped up. So that's on the far side. I mean, I probably alone put 200 hours of due diligence into that. We then had efforts that only produced like a 30, maybe a 40-page report that probably just took 2 or 3 weeks with a couple of my analysts. But again, those were usually for much smaller raises. Those were for maybe $200,000, $300,000 raises. So the due diligence process alone, will take an easy 6 to 8, maybe even 12 weeks. That doesn't include the amount of time, you're talking about term sheet negotiation. So that's just on the back end. That's when you found a lead investor. And again, your lead investor probably only represents maybe a third of your round. You're talking about probably 2 to 3 months of just negotiating and doing the deal with them. On the front end, we can talk about, building your investor sales funnel and some of those tactics, all day long, but reality is the close rate is probably at about maybe 2-3%. So again, look at the amount of money you want to raise, divide it by $25,000 or even $10,000, and that's the number of investors you need. And if you need to find, a dozen investors, there's a good chance you're going to have to talk to 150 investors. and that, you know, if we say you pitch the Arch Angels and they would have 30 people in that group, and then you go and you pitch the Centennial Angels and they have a dozen, I mean, that's not even half of the people that you needed to you know, speak to in that round. So I think these are just some resources. Again, hyperlinks, you guys all have it. So any other questions? I think we have about 5 minutes left. Yes?
What kind of items of due diligence should a startup business be prepared to answer or expect to have uncovered?
Question is everything. I've got a blog post for ITEN that goes into it a little longer, but when we were with Techless Angels, we actually had we probably requested 80 documents. Now, not all of them were relevant. We were looking at everything from medical devices to consumer products. So, you know, some of the sections of documents were very specific to, you know, getting your FDA approval or, you know, other things. So, and then we also had a company questionnaire we gave the companies, and it was probably 20 pages unfilled out, and usually when the companies finished it, it was about 50 pages. And that, you know, pretty much covered every high-level question anyone would want to know. But again, it all depends on, you know, the process. If you're only raising $100,000, well then you don't need to go through that level, you know, due diligence. If you're trying to raise $1 million, I mean, you're going to spend probably 3 months of due diligence. Yes.
This is just because you've seen so many pitches, and I have an experience where I brought up crowdfunding, and it was so distracting. And so that kind of, going to your point of giving them a reason to say no, have you seen any really good pivots that didn't seem like they just grabbed another idea? Whereas rather, if your first one didn't work, they pivoted into something that was more...
Like in the meeting?
Yeah, or
No.
just any, yeah.
The secret is when an investor asks you a question, 9 times out of 10 they already know the answer, but they want to see how you answer it. And depending on how confidently and how clearly and concisely you answer the question, they can read how well you thought about your business model. I think I tell the story every once in a while. One of the best questions I ever saw answered was we were in a deep dive due diligence session, and one of our investors asked a fairly straightforward question about why are you doing business model A as opposed to business model B? And the entrepreneur said, all right, turned to the wipe off board and said, this is the thing that keeps me up at night, and, you know, started marking through. And he said, actually, like, there's option C, D, E, and F, and started going through, and the investor's like, stop, we get it. You thought way more about your business model than we ever possibly could, and it was on that alone that they were interested in investing in life. They want that entrepreneur that has thought through every aspect and has a rational, you know, logical reason for why they've chosen, you know, A or B.
So when you're talking about all those documents, those documents are proving to the investor that you've thought through all those things. It's not just the financials with the narrative. It's just not just the marketing plan. It's not just the go-to-market plan. It's not just the sales strategy. It's not just the hiring pattern. It's all of it.
Yeah, so one of the things in my blog post, and this came out of me actually giving due diligence comments to an entrepreneur in the ITEN program, I was like, look, there are things such as how you organize your due diligence folder that an investor looks at. And he had turned in an incredibly sloppily, poorly labeled due diligence folder. And I said, look, this tells me, one, you either don't care about the exercise, or two, you have a very sloppy mind, neither of which are what investors are looking for. And when I said that, he kind of had an oh shit moment. And he was like, oh, I didn't realize that, but you're right. Every time I'm putting anything out in front of investors, they're reading between the lines to see how I'm performing the task. And I mean, a lot of the times when we asked for those documents was simply to see how organized they were. I actually would keep a clock to see how many days it took them to answer it. And the companies that were like, I've got it all on a thumb drive, you know, can you come by and pick it up tomorrow, scored high. The ones that had the bug for 3 weeks scored low.
One last question.
I'll do it, it'll be up.
Okay.
No, go.
When investors hear pitches, is your view that they're looking for reasons to say yes or reasons to say yes?
A mix. I mean, again, if we look back, the average angel investor is going to write 2, maybe 3 checks a year. So they're looking, and if they belong to an angel group, they're probably seeing 5 deals a month at a minimum. So they're looking at first for something that excites them. Once they're excited by something, then they start looking for reasons why it will fail. I think one of the things Tech was saying, those guys used to say, or one of the members I know used to say was, he liked investing in business that he didn't think we're going to lose everything. So he was not a home run guy. He would rather invest in a solid but smaller growing business than someone that was going for the moon but could fail a million times between now and the next 6 months. So, but each investor is different. But I would say the first thing they're looking for is something that excites them.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.